I am going to be talking. I thought about academic study, but the more I thought about what I actually want to say about integrated skills, I thought, it's actually applicable to any kind of teaching that you do. So my examples are all going to come from academic textbooks because that's what I have written that followed this approach. But the approach itself can be broader than just academic. So I hope that is clear. Here's a very brief outline of what I'm going to be covering in today's short session. And for me, 30 minutes is actually very short. So I apologize if I speak a little quickly. I have a lot to say. But I want to spend most of my time on that number three. That's why it's larger. So after we talk about what integrated skills are and why they're good, the real question is, how do I do that? What does that look like in an exercise? What does that look like in a classroom? What does that look like in a course? So that's where I want to spend the bulk of my time. Um, Hopefully we'll have time for a few questions or comments at the end. If you have a question, drop it into that Q&A chat, and at the end, then we'll pick a few questions to ask me. And if we don't finish the conversation here, we can finish it somewhere else. So I am pretty easy to find online. So I also want to give you a brief discussion of or some information about my background so you understand where I'm coming from and what informs the kind of things I write. So I taught in the classroom 25 years before moving freelance and moving into teacher training, which I still do. I taught for over 5 years in Japan. I've taught for 4 or 5 years in North Africa and the Middle East, and for years in the United States. So I've had monolingual classrooms, I've had bilingual classrooms, and I've had in the US those multilingual classrooms where students come from Latin America and Europe and they come from Africa. And so those kinds of backgrounds, pretty much all adults. I love kids, but I'm not a teacher of children. But when I say adults, I am also thinking university age young adults and including high school emerging adults, people who will be adults soon. About halfway through my teaching career, I began writing and editing materials. And with the integrated skills approach, I actually started first editing a series, not for Macmillan, but for some other publishers. And that's where I began to get really fascinated with this integrated skills approach and how that works. So I was thrilled when my first publisher, who is Macmillan, I've been writing for them since 1997 about both single skill books and course books. But when they asked me to be the series consultant and also a co-author on one level of Skillful, their integrated skills course, I thought, oh, how wonderful. It's all coming together. So I don't know if anybody who's here is already a current user of Skillful. This is the current edition. This is not the official Macmillan picture from their website. These are my Skillfuls on my own living room floor when the day they arrived, and I was so excited. So this is the current edition, which is the second edition out now. But, and you are some of the first people to see this, we have a third edition coming out that I've been working on all year. These are the bright, cheerful reading and writing covers. And these are rolling out now, really. So I don't have a box of them on my floor yet, but hopefully I will soon. So I do want to say that my examples that I'm going to be showing you of actual exercises and materials, those all come from Skillful because that's the series I know, and that's the series I've written on and worked on. But the approach doesn't have to be used with just one book. The approach can be used with other books. It can be used with no books. That's up to you and your classroom. So what does integrated skills mean? And I don't mean means in the dictionary. So what does it mean in the world of textbooks? So in the world of textbooks, it means combined reading and writing in one book or class or course, or listening and speaking together in one class or course, so that you, not that you teaching speaking, and so obviously you have to do some listening, or you're teaching listening with a little bit of speaking, but really you're spending an equal amount of time and giving an equal amount of attention to both skills. When I was teaching in Japan, one question that my students often ask me, more in Japan than any other country, which is ironic, they'd say, why is English so fast? Listening is hard for me just because English speakers speak so quickly. And I would say, really? Because actually English is slower than Japanese. And this always surprised people. They would say, no, Japanese is so slow and relaxed, but English is so fast. But actually, no, Japanese has the honor of being the fastest spoken language by syllable rate in the world. English is quick, but we're not as fast as Japanese. And yet, even people who are bilingual in those two languages often guess that English is faster because English feels faster. So why? Why does English feel so fast? And I would say it's because of our schwa sound, that sound, and contractions in spoken English, and elisions, those connections between words where one word blends into the next word. So, for example, if a student, a learner, says to me, I can sing, but I can't dance. For me, I can understand that person. The meaning is not hard to hear. But if a learner speaks like that, they're probably not going to understand me when I say, I can sing, but I can't dance. They hear a few accented syllables, but the meaning of the sentence isn't there. And even if I say it very slowly, I can sing, but I can't dance. If they don't know how to handle that contraction and the way a T and a D in English sort of merge together, and that the vowel sound in can is dropped into a schwa, I can sing. If they don't know how that works, if they can't say that, or if they don't say that, it's so much harder to hear and understand. So although a slower kind of incorrect intonation will work for me to understand them, it makes them understanding me so much more difficult. But if they learn the two together, if they learn speaking and listening at the same time, the whole thing is easier. They sound more natural and they can hear more easily. A speaking skill that I think is helped a lot by listening. I often have higher level students ask me, but when I'm trying to say something longer, I have to stop and think about ideas and think about vocabulary and plan my sentences. But when I stop, somebody thinks I'm done speaking and they interrupt and I've lost my chance. What can I do in English? Well, this happens, of course, in every language. What they need is those phrases in English that let the listener know, no, I'm still speaking. I'm keeping my time. I'm planning my next thing. Let me see. Well, one way to look at this is, and those are my planning phrases in English. So once they know how to listen for those and see how they work, not only can they use them themselves when they're speaking, but they also know when not to interrupt another speaker who is holding the floor. So it's great to teach those skills together because they see those connections. So listening and speaking is one natural integration. The other one would be reading and writing. So when students ask me, how can I make my writing sound more natural? I know they're probably the kind of careful student who likes to be correct and they want to write a sentence that is grammatically correct, but then they're playing it safe and they're writing short, simple sentences, and whether or not they're grammatically correct, they don't sound like sophisticated, fluent, elegant English. Because what they need are longer sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, and sentence variety. A long sentence followed by a short sentence. right? A single clause followed by a sentence with a simple clause and a dependent clause. But you can't practice sentence variety in isolation, right? By definition, you need to practice it with in a longer text. And it's so much easier if you start from reading and you notice these things and you can go through a text and see how many different kinds of sentences there are and look at, excuse me, how many short sentences there are per paragraph, how many long sentences, how many complex sentences, how many compound. So to notice that first in reading makes it so much easier to apply that in writing. But writing also helps reading, right? If you have ever had a student express to you that feeling of I know all the words in the sentence, but it's a long sentence. I start at the beginning, I read to the end, and at the end, I have no idea what the meaning is, even though I know all of the words. And this happens in paragraphs, it happens in pages of reading, even when the student is concentrating and reading and they think they understand, but at the end, there's like, I've somehow missed the sense. I feel lost. But working on writing skills makes that easier because where they're getting lost is not seeing those smaller units of organization. And punctuation helps us a little with this, but not entirely. But if they begin to see elements of an English sentence as units, here's a prepositional phrase, and they see which units and slots can move, and I can put that prepositional phrase at the end of the sentence. I can put it at the beginning of the sentence. I can put it in the middle of the sentence, but I can't put it between these two things. Then they naturally begin to, as they're reading, chunk those thought groups, verb phrases and prepositional phrases into little units of meaning, and it makes reading so much easier. And a lot of students don't know they're missing this skill because they think the key to reading is more vocabulary, and more vocabulary will help you, obviously, but there's more to it than that. But when you learn to write phrases and you work with manipulating smaller chunks, that helps your overall reading. So why 2 skills instead of 4 skills in a course book? And I do want to first say that I'm not saying that integrating skills is the only way to teach. I'm not even necessarily saying it's the best way to teach. I'm saying it's a way to teach. And there is no one true method that is the best method for every teacher and every class and every group of students. That's your judgment call as a teacher to evaluate your situation and your class and your personality and your teaching style. What I want to do today is show you one good approach that for me has been very effective with students. And my simple answer to why 2 skills instead of 1 or 4 is because sometimes 1 is too few. They miss those connections, and 4 is too many. And 2 is just a good number. What I'm also a course book author. I've certainly written 4 skills courses, but when I have classes of students who can do the exercises on one page and the next page and the next page, all through the 8 or 10 pages of the unit, but at the end of the unit, although they haven't made any mistakes, their English still isn't any better, I know the input has been too heavy, right? They've kind of learned too much too quickly. And what they actually needed was more opportunities to practice 2 skills like listening and speaking or reading and writing together to really get stronger at that. So even when I have classes of people who want sort of all skills together, what I do as a teacher is I think, where are they weakest? If they're pretty good at listening and speaking, then I want them in a reading writing book. If they're great at reading and writing, then I want them in a listening speaking book. And of course, every skill is going to be present in some sense, but I want to concentrate on the ones they find hardest. And having just those 2 skills gives them enough time to practice and really master those skills. So how does this happen and what does this look like? So when I say we here, how do we do this? I don't mean we, the whole world. I mean we textbook authors, and specifically authors in on the Skillful series, because that's the one that I was overseeing and the one that I know, and the one that I wrote part of myself. So step zero for us in a series like this is to begin with the topic. So it's a topic-based course. And at the very beginning, we sat down with editors and a team of authors, and we have 5 levels. It goes from A1 all the way up to C1. And we brainstormed topics, and we sort of gave each level some topics and then sent the authors off to write. So we get a topic for a unit, and that's kind of our zero starting point. Then comes step 1. And you will notice I have 2 step 1s because it depends on the topic and it depends on the day, but often I'm kind of doing those 2 step 1s at the same time. So each unit of Skillful, like for the reading, writing books, there are 2 main readings. The first one is a little bit shorter and easier. The second one is kind of a meatier main text. And then we end with a writing assignment for the students. So I'm aware that second number 1, I'm aware of what I want students to be able to do. But probably the first thing that I sit down to create is that middle reading, is that longer text. And same for the listening speaking. They have listenings and then a final speaking project at the end. So they're thinking, what am I preparing students for? But they probably begin writing that main text. So after I've written what I hope is an engaging, interesting, useful text, then I look at all the language there and I think, if I were a student coming into this unit, learning this, what do I need to know? What do I need to understand in order to be able to attack this text? And I do think there's a difference between practicing English and teaching English. So I want my text to be a little bit above the level of where students are, so that without this teaching, they would find it challenging. But with this teaching, they find it possible. So I'm looking at my text to think, where are my challenge points? What reading skills do they need? What vocabulary do they need? What functional language do they need? What grammar? Do they need any background knowledge in order to approach this topic? Because that's the challenge of academic English, is how do we move students from the personal to the more universal of academic language? So what is it that they need to do for the text? And then what is it that they need to be able to produce in order to do that final project? And often those are the same. Sometimes there's a little difference between them. So I keep adjusting my input, adjusting my output until we have a reasonable overlap. It's never going to be a total overlap, but I want to make sure that anything that they're inputting is going to help them with their own output. Then, for all of those things that they need to learn, right, reading skills or listening skills or vocabulary or background knowledge or grammar, then those become sort of mini lessons within the lesson. And we have a presentation perhaps, or we ask them to notice and identify some points. Then a lot of controlled practice, a lot of exercises. And the first exercises after a presentation, I feel, should be pretty easy. I want students to think, oh, I can do this. I'm good at this. And then they get a little less controlled until finally I'm giving them a situation where this language would come up. So it's a freer practice. So I want to give you some examples of what this looks like on a page. So this is from the listening speaking level 2. So that's at a B1 level. So we have 5 levels. I've chosen to show you today 2 of our middle levels, but you can imagine it up or down in level. So we're talking about speaking and listening. Phrasal verbs is a pretty natural grammar point because they are so common in spoken English. So we have a presentation where we talk about the difference between a base verb catch and a phrasal verb catch up. And what I think of are pretty easy exercises, a matching that's pretty controlled. So they reinforce the meaning. Then, a kind of controlled practice, working down to a freer practice at the bottom, ask and answer questions from exercise 2. So they're speaking it and they're hearing it. But the way we tie this into listening, and I love this label of pronunciation for listening, because this is what I said with I can sing but I can't dance. The pronunciation helps your listening so much. So if you know with a phrasal verb what syllables to stress, not only will you speak more naturally, but suddenly it becomes easier to hear those things. And those prepositions at the end of a phrasal verb can be hard to catch if you're waiting to hear them emphasized in the same way that a verb is emphasized, and they're not. So we explain the pronunciation point, give them some listening practice where they're focused just on those points, and then move to a freer practice. Find the phrasal verbs yourself. What would you stress? Then listen and check. If I were teaching this lesson myself, I would add in some more steps here that are not in the textbook. And I hope no matter what materials you use, that as teachers, you are doing this all the time, that you are taking sort of the raw materials, the base materials that we have given you, and adding your own instructions all the time. I can't put into one student book all the exercises that I would do because the book would be this thick and nobody could afford it or hold it. So what I would do here is maybe some choral repetition. I might say the sentence myself, have the class say it back. We can listen to the recording, have them repeat several times, have them work in small groups or in pairs. One student says the sentence, other student can close their eyes and raise their hand when they hear the phrasal verb, or they can be looking at each other and giving each other feedback. I think you emphasized this correctly. I think you didn't. Let's listen again. I do a lot of repeating and speaking drilling here before we moved on to something completely free. This is something that's a little, it's not broken down into 6 steps, but such an important listening point for students first. How do you know when speakers are telling you something is important? Especially if you're doing test prep with your students for TOEFL or IELTS or any kind of national exam like that. When listening, it's really useful to know what's a main point, what's a digression, right? And these phrases, first they learn to hear them, but then of course, when they give a presentation, they can turn around and identify their main points the same way. Instead of saying, my first main point is, they can do it the same way that fluent speakers do. So this photo, it's not just to wake you up. It's to remind me that now we're going to talk about a reading writing unit. This is from a unit that I wrote on fire. That was my topic. So when I sit down, so this is now a B2 level. This is from our book 3, a little bit higher level. So when I think about my global topic and I'm planning, what do I want to write about fire? I'm also thinking, first, what do I want students to produce as a piece of writing at the end? What can students write about fire? I assume before they go through this unit, they can't write much about fire because they're probably not experts on fire. So I need to give them information as well as skills so that they can write something. When I look at something like this, particularly someone like me who lives in the western part of the United States where we have problems every summer now with forest fires, I think problem, solution. So I chose my final writing task first. In my head, that's the first thing that came to me is like, we're going to write a problem solution text. I didn't write this whole page first. I just did problem solution essay. and made a note on a piece of paper. And then I went back and thought about my texts. So that longest main second reading is about climate change and causes of forest fires and solutions. So they're reading a problem solution text, although a much more sophisticated one than they'll write. But then when I think back one step further of what's my first reading going to be about, I think in order to approach this topic, they need some basic information and some basic vocabulary, not only about problems and solutions, but about fire. So the first reading is about causes of wildfires. I actually have them guess, that's my prediction exercise, what are the top 5 causes of wildfire? And if we had an hour, I would make you do that too. But then the answers are revealed, and they're more prepared for a deeper reading. Once I have those readings, then I begin pulling out my language skills. So I don't expect students at the B2 level to write a text as sophisticated as the text that I, a fluent speaker, am writing in a textbook. They're not supposed to produce something that's a, a journal quality article. So we have a third, you could call it a reading, that's an example of the kind of essay we expect them to write. So it's a model essay on a very similar question, not the same question, because we don't want to take possibilities away from students. But so it's another text of the quality that we are going to guide them to write, but on the same topic with problem and solution as a genre. And you'll notice some questions, and they do a little bit of simple analysis of the writing model the same way they do of the main readings. So then I pick the writing skill that I think students need in order to write a problem solution essay. And one skill is supporting your arguments. If you are going to identify a problem and propose a solution, you need to argue that your solution is a good solution, and that your problem is a significant problem. So I ask for some reasons, some examples, expert testimony, but these are things that are actually in the readings as well. The vocabulary then works in both directions. So we have vocabulary collocations around problems. They can use this in their writing, but they've seen it in the reading. The grammar came from that second reading of mine. Once it was in the second reading, I made sure it appeared in the first reading, and that it would be useful grammar for them in their own writing. And this is grammar that I just looked at what I had created and said, oh, wow, sure are a lot of gerunds and reduced clauses for this topic. Let's take a look at that. There are also smaller skills that are things I want them to notice and understand about the reading that I would say more advanced students could use in their own writing, but lower level students might not. But the information is out there for them. Of the skills that we absolutely want them to have in their writing, we have a partner exercise and a self-reflection, a peer review, where they can make sure that they've used the language that we want them to use. And if they haven't, they can put it in before they revise it and give it to a teacher for a grade. So how can you do this if you are not going to sit down and write a whole textbook? How can you use this approach in your teaching? So I would suggest that you follow a similar process, that you start with what students should be able to do, whether they want to do this, need to do this. Do they need to write a cover letter for a job application? Do they need to read a website? What is it that they need to do in English? And then what do they need to know how to do in order to do that? So if they need to give an opinion, classify information, whatever skills they need, whether they're linguistic skills or functional skills, identify them, write them down kind of one by one so you know what you're looking for, and then look for models. You can look for podcasts, you can look for YouTube clips, you can look for articles that have those features that you want. If you can't find them anywhere, that's a signal that maybe you haven't identified the correct ones. But it's easier than you think if you correctly identify what students have to do, is to find examples of fluent English speakers doing those things. You can, if it's something written, you can adjust it a bit. You can even re-record something if you want to change it a bit and salt some skills in. And then break it down and practice the smaller pieces that come from that larger text. Pull out the grammar, pull out the vocabulary, do some work with it. And just as it's not sexy these days to have students do a lot of memorizing or practicing or drilling or repeating, but I really think it's so important for your students to really learn the language. Don't be afraid to have them do a little hard work so that the language becomes easier for them. Then gradually work up to longer, less controlled tasks, have them write a whole sentence instead of fill in a gap, and then offer prompts or situations where they can use those skills inside a more fluent whole. And my eye on the time. Hopefully, we do have time for a few questions or comments. I will turn that over to Will, who I hope has been reading the question, the Q&A chat.
Hello.
I see him. Hello.
Hello. Thank you very much, Dorothy. Absolutely wonderful. As per normal, as per this morning. Thank you so much. So yeah, we have got a couple of questions, if that's all right.
Good.
Well, one person's asking about introducing writing to basic students. Would you use this approach, do you think, to introduce writing?
Oh yeah. I'm writing for some reason is one of the harder skills to teach. I think students are reluctant, teachers are reluctant. Part of that is the marking and grading problem. That's a whole different webinar. But if you have them from the very beginning, writing, whether it's sentences or paragraphs, the same grammar and functions that they're reading, it will make the reading easier. And if you give them more and more models of what you want them to write, the more times they read it, the better they will be at writing it. That's one reason I'm such a huge believer in peer review, which I know sometimes teachers and students fight me on, but I fight back. I think if your students don't like it, you're not doing it right. But every time when students share writing with each other, they're getting that many more models, right? And that much more inspiration. So at the lower level where texts are short, have them do peer review with more than one student. Have them share in a group. Let them see 6 different examples of a paragraph as they share their one different example. And that's an easy way to get a lot of model texts.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dorothy. And that's not, so you don't feel that sort of wouldn't start fossilizing the wrong.
No, students don't learn each other's errors. I know that's a fear, but it research shows that it just doesn't happen that way anymore. They don't pick up each other's spoken errors either.
Okay, great. Lovely. Thank you. All right. So coming in now. What time is it? We've got some time.
Any more? Is there any more questions?
Yeah. So just we've got quite a few now. Just give me 10 seconds. I'm just reading it through.
To pick some.
Yeah, because they've all just come in. What could be some challenges for teachers and learners using this book when it comes to writing skills? Are there any challenges for the teacher or for the student in using this?
I think the main challenge for teachers, and this is more kind of a timing challenge, is to give more time to the readings and then get to the writing and think, oh no, it's already November. We've really got to move on to Unit 5. I'll just assign it as homework and sort of rush through the writing. And it's just experience, as you get to know your students better and to know how much time they should spend with writing. I love to have my students start the writing process, start the brainstorming, outlining, in class so that I know it happens.
Okay.
Because if you tell them about the benefits of brainstorming, outlining, and send them home, and they wait till it's 11 o'clock at night and their homework is due, some of them just go, yeah, I don't have time for that. I'm just going to write my first draft. So that they don't skip those crucial steps, I like to start that in class, which means you have to budget class time for it.
Okay, got it. And so Tamar has put a question out there. I wonder if I'm going to ask you. So I think it's important to teach students how to paraphrase from the beginning rather than modeling. Why do you think modeling is more important?
I don't think it's either or. I think you have to do both, right? I think they have to see an example of, this is a good paraphrase, this is an unsuccessful paraphrase, or this is a weak paraphrase, this is a strong paraphrase.
Okay.
And I think the more examples they have of that, the easier it is for them to do the practice. Because what students want to first do is just go for synonyms, right? And they go to a dictionary or a thesaurus and they change the verb to something with a similar meaning. They change the noun to something with a similar meaning. And now they have a badly paraphrased sentence that just isn't as good.
Yeah.
But what we want them to do is to change the syntax, to really sort of throw it out, keep the ideas, and say it another way.
Yeah, mix it up.
But if you could show them an example of, here's a weak paraphrase, here's a strong paraphrase, and then you say, okay, now you do what I've taught you. Having seen those examples, they know what they're trying to do. Students want to do things correctly. Most students, 99% of students, want to do it right, but they want to know what it is they're supposed to do. So if they know what the end goal looks like, it's easier for them to actually do that.
To create the bridge rather than the bridge and the next piece. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dorothy. I think we've taken way too much of your day so far, and it's time you went off and did what you do at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, sleep. But I do also want to thank people here who have interrupted their day and taken time. Give yourselves a round of applause because you showed up, you invested in yourself and your teaching. Thank you so much. If you want to continue this conversation with me, that's my website. There's a contact form. I'm also pretty active on Facebook. I do take friend requests from language teachers, as long as I can look at your profile and see that you talk about education and teaching and learning, at least sometimes in English. If you search for my name, I have an Instagram account, but nothing ever happens there. It's not where my conversations are. You're welcome to follow me. You'll probably never see anything. But I'm always happy to talk to teachers about teaching because that is my passion. So thank you for coming and for letting me share my ideas.
Thanks a lot, Dorothy. Amazing. Well, I think, time to say thank you and adieu.